Marcus had always been known for his calm and disciplined nature. Years of serving as a Navy SEAL had taught him to stay composed, no matter the danger or chaos around him. After returning from his last mission overseas, he wanted nothing more than a peaceful life. He started spending more time with his family, volunteering in the local community, and enjoying the simple pleasures he had missed during long deployments. One morning, Marcus received a call that required him to appear in court. He was asked to provide testimony in a case involving a serious incident. Marcus knew that giving an honest account was part of his responsibility. He prepared carefully, reviewing the details he had observed and making sure he could present them clearly. Despite the nervousness he felt, he reminded himself that he had faced far worse situations, and this was nothing compared to the challenges he had overcome during his service. When Marcus entered the courthouse, the air was tense. The room was filled with lawyers, officers, and spectators. The atmosphere felt heavy with anticipation. Marcus noticed a few officers whispering to each other and exchanging glances. Among them was Officer Daniels. He was known in the department for his strict, sometimes harsh approach. Daniels' eyes immediately locked on Marcus. There was something in the way he watched that made Marcus uneasy. Marcus walked with steady steps toward his assigned seat, trying to ignore the intense gaze. But as he passed by Daniels, the officer suddenly stepped forward and kicked Marcus lightly in the leg. The action was unexpected and unnecessary. Marcus stopped in his tracks, stunned by the behavior. He looked down at Daniels, who did not seem apologetic. Instead, he smirked slightly as if testing Marcus's patience. The courtroom went quiet. A few spectators gasped and whispers ran through the room. Marcus took a deep breath. He knew that reacting angrily could only make the situation worse. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, and calmly moved to his seat. His heart was racing, but his face remained calm. He had been trained to stay in control even under the most stressful circumstances. The judge noticed the commotion and raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Daniels, please explain your behavior," the judge said in a firm voice. The courtroom waited in silence for a response. Daniels muttered something under his breath and returned to his position without a proper explanation. Marcus felt a wave of frustration, but he reminded himself that this was not the battlefield. This was a courtroom, and patience was his best ally. Marcus took a moment to observe the rest of the room. Witnesses were quietly watching the exchange, some appearing confused, others concerned. He realized that many people would remember this moment, and it could affect the credibility of everyone involved. Marcus focused on preparing his notes for testimony, reviewing the key points he needed to convey. He wanted to make sure that his words were precise and clear, leaving no room for misunderstanding. As the court session began, Marcus spoke confidently. His voice was calm but firm, and he presented the facts exactly as he had seen them. The tension in the room slowly shifted. While some eyes were still on Daniels, many people began paying attention to Marcus's testimony. He could see that his approach was having an impact. By staying composed, he was able to turn a potentially embarrassing situation into one where his credibility and professionalism stood out. Even though the incident had shaken him for a brief moment, Marcus felt a growing sense of determination. He realized that sometimes standing firm did not mean using force or anger. It meant being patient, strategic, and focused on what mattered most. Marcus knew that his next steps would be important, and he would need to handle the situation wisely. This was only the beginning, and one careful action could change everything. After the courtroom session, Marcus felt a mix of relief and lingering tension. The incident with Officer Daniels had shaken him more than he wanted to admit, even though he had stayed calm during the proceedings. He walked slowly out of the courthouse, taking deep breaths and trying to clear his mind. The sunlight outside felt almost too bright after the dim, tense atmosphere of the courtroom. Marcus remembered the moment when Daniels had shoved him. It was not just disrespectful, it was unprofessional and unnecessary. Marcus knew that confronting the officer directly in anger could only make things worse. He had learned in the Navy SEALs that patience and planning were far more effective than a sudden reaction. Yet he also knew he could not ignore what had happened. Justice and accountability mattered. As he reached his car, Marcus pulled out his phone and called his friend Omar. Omar had also served in the Navy and had been a mentor to Marcus during his early days as a SEAL. Marcus explained the situation calmly, detailing every movement and word from the incident. He also mentioned the reactions of witnesses and how the courtroom cameras had likely captured everything. Omar listened carefully, nodding, even though Marcus could not see him. "Marcus," he said, his voice steady, "you handled yourself well in court, but now you need to be smart about the next steps. One well-planned action can change everything. You have to think like you did on missions. Use strategy, not emotion." Marcus felt a sense of clarity after talking to Omar. The path forward was no longer clouded with anger or frustration. He realized that filing an official complaint through the proper channels would not only address what had happened to him, but could also prevent similar behavior in the future. His years of training had taught him the value of careful, deliberate action, and this situation was no different. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, reviewing his notes. He carefully wrote down the details of the incident, including the time, location, actions, and words exchanged. He even noted the witnesses who had observed what happened. Marcus knew that accuracy was crucial. Any exaggeration or missing detail could weaken his case. He wanted the facts to speak for themselves, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The next morning, Marcus made the call Omar had advised. He contacted Internal Affairs, the department responsible for investigating police conduct. Marcus spoke clearly, calmly, and without anger. He described what happened in court, provided the names of witnesses, and mentioned that the courtroom had security cameras that recorded the entire session. The officer on the other end listened carefully and assured Marcus that the matter would be investigated thoroughly. Filing the complaint gave Marcus a sense of relief, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The situation would take time to resolve, and patience was still required. Marcus went back to his daily routine, exercising in the morning, volunteering at the community center, and spending time with his family. Keeping busy helped him focus on positive actions rather than dwelling on the confrontation. Over the next few days, Marcus noticed a change in how people looked at him. Friends and neighbors, unaware of the full situation, commented on his calm and composed demeanor. They admired how he had handled a difficult situation without aggression. Marcus realized that sometimes the way a person responded mattered more than the incident itself. By staying calm and measured, he was setting an example, whether he intended to or not. Even as Marcus carried on with his life, he kept thinking about Daniels. The officer had underestimated him, assuming that a small act of aggression would provoke a reaction. Instead, Marcus had used his training, intelligence, and patience. He felt confident that this approach would lead to a fair outcome. Marcus also knew that the process of justice required time, but the one careful action he had taken, the call to Internal Affairs, was already starting to make a difference. By the end of the week, Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction. He had turned an uncomfortable confrontation into a situation that could result in accountability and fairness. He understood that courage was not only about facing physical danger, it was also about standing up for what was right in a calm and disciplined way. Marcus smiled to himself, knowing that the next steps would continue to test his patience, wisdom, and perseverance. But he was ready. Marcus knew that the call to Internal Affairs was only the first step. He had done his part by reporting the incident, but the next stage would require patience. He spent the morning at his home reviewing his notes again, making sure every detail was clear. Even small details could make a difference in an investigation. He wrote down the exact time he had entered the courtroom, the steps he had taken, and the precise moment Officer Daniels had shoved him. He also noted the expressions and words of the witnesses who had seen everything. After finishing his notes, Marcus decided to visit his friend Omar again. Omar had experience dealing with high-pressure situations, and Marcus valued his advice. They met at a quiet park, sitting on a bench under the shade of a large tree. Marcus explained how tense he had felt during and after the incident. He admitted that even though he had stayed calm, a small part of him wanted to react immediately, to show Daniels that his actions had consequences. Omar listened carefully and nodded. "Marcus, it is natural to feel that way," he said. "But the real strength is in waiting, in letting the system work, and in making sure your actions are precise. You've already done what most people fail to do. You stayed calm and you took the right steps. That is far more powerful than a direct confrontation." Marcus appreciated Omar's words. He realized that this situation was different from his time in the Navy. There, he could act decisively with force if needed. Here, force would only make things worse. Intelligence, patience, and documentation were his best tools. He decided to continue focusing on those qualities. The following day, Marcus received a call from Internal Affairs. They told him that they had opened an official investigation and requested additional information. Marcus provided them with the names of witnesses and offered to submit a written statement. He also mentioned the courtroom cameras, which could verify his account. The officer on the line assured Marcus that the investigation would be thorough and fair. Marcus felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief because someone was listening and taking his complaint seriously. Anticipation because he knew that the process could be slow and that he would need to remain patient. He returned to his daily routine, trying to focus on positive activities. He spent time exercising, going for runs in the early morning, and volunteering at the local community center, helping young people develop skills and confidence. As days passed, Marcus began to notice small changes. Some of the courthouse staff who had witnessed the incident nodded at him or offered quiet words of support. A few officers also approached him privately, acknowledging that Daniels had overstepped his boundaries. Marcus realized that standing firm and reporting the incident had already started to create subtle effects. People were paying attention. His calm and disciplined approach had made an impression. Marcus also spent time reflecting on the situation. He realized that what had happened in the courtroom was more than just a personal conflict. It was an example of accountability and responsibility. By reporting the incident, he was contributing to a larger principle, that behavior, especially from those in positions of authority, mattered. He wanted to set an example, not through anger or confrontation, but through smart and deliberate action. Late in the evening, Marcus reviewed his notes one more time before going to bed. He thought about the next steps and prepared himself mentally. He knew the investigation might take time, and he might need to provide additional statements or clarify details. But he felt ready. He understood that patience and perseverance were just as important as courage. Before turning off the lights, Marcus reflected on his journey. His training as a Navy SEAL had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically, and to focus on what he could control. Those lessons were now helping him navigate a completely different kind of challenge, a challenge that required intelligence, documentation, and patience instead of physical action. Marcus smiled quietly. He knew that the next days would be important, and he was ready to face them with the same discipline that had carried him through so many missions before. Marcus woke early, feeling determined. The call to Internal Affairs had set things in motion, but he knew the process would take time. He wanted to make sure he was fully prepared for every step of the investigation. After a quick breakfast, he sat at his desk with his notes, reviewing every detail of the courtroom incident again. He made sure each fact was clear, concise, and accurate. He understood that careful preparation was essential. A single mistake could make the situation more complicated. By mid-morning, Marcus received another call from Internal Affairs. The officer on the line asked him to provide a full written statement describing the incident with Officer Daniels. Marcus agreed and began typing. He carefully explained the sequence of events, how he had entered the courtroom, how Daniels had shoved him, the reactions of witnesses, and the tension in the room. He also noted that courtroom cameras had likely recorded the incident, which could serve as impartial evidence. Marcus reviewed the statement several times to ensure every word was precise and factual. After submitting his statement, Marcus felt a sense of calm. He had done everything he could to ensure the investigation would proceed fairly. He reminded himself that, just like in his Navy SEAL missions, small, careful actions could have a significant impact. One clear report backed by evidence could make a difference far beyond what he could see in the moment. Later that afternoon, Marcus decided to visit the courthouse again. He wanted to observe the environment, not to confront Daniels, but to understand the dynamics better. As he entered the building, he noticed familiar faces, people who had witnessed the courtroom incident. A few nodded politely, acknowledging him. Marcus felt reassured that his presence was not ignored. While walking through the hallways, Marcus overheard whispers about the investigation. Staff members mentioned that Internal Affairs had been reviewing security footage and speaking to witnesses. Marcus realized that his careful approach was already creating results. By staying calm and documenting everything, he had started a process that could lead to real accountability. That evening, Marcus returned home and reflected on the day. He realized that his actions were not just about addressing the incident with Daniels. They were also about demonstrating the importance of responsibility and professionalism. Marcus had seen many situations during his military service where careful planning and patience were more effective than immediate action. Now he was applying the same principles in a civilian context. Over the next few days, Internal Affairs contacted Marcus several times for follow-up questions. Each time he answered calmly and clearly, providing any additional details they needed. He noticed that the investigation was thorough and methodical. The investigators were reviewing the courtroom cameras and speaking to witnesses individually. Marcus understood that this careful approach would make it difficult for anyone to dismiss his report. Marcus also continued his daily routine, staying active and focused on positive activities. He went running in the early morning, volunteered at the community center, and spent quality time with his family. Keeping himself occupied helped him remain calm and patient. Marcus knew that frustration or impatience could distract him from the most important goal, ensuring that the investigation was fair and accurate. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from one of the witnesses who had observed the courtroom incident. The witness confirmed that they had provided a statement to Internal Affairs and expressed support for Marcus. Hearing this reassured him that he was not alone in seeking justice. He realized that when people acted with integrity and honesty, positive change was possible. By the end of the week, Marcus felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The process was moving forward, and he had contributed to it in a responsible and disciplined way. He understood that accountability did not happen overnight, but with careful action it could be achieved. Marcus also reflected on the lessons he had learned. Patience, preparation, and clarity were powerful tools, just as important as courage and strength. As he went to bed that night, Marcus felt a sense of determination. The investigation was far from over, but he was ready to continue following the process with patience and integrity. He knew that one careful action, making the call to Internal Affairs, had already started to change everything. Marcus closed his eyes, confident that staying calm, strategic, and disciplined would guide him through the days ahead. Days passed, and Marcus continued his routine while the investigation progressed. He stayed focused on exercise, family, and community work, but in the back of his mind he knew that the outcome of the Internal Affairs inquiry could have lasting effects. He also realized that patience would be tested. Unlike the fast decisions he had made during Navy missions, this situation required waiting for others to act. Marcus reminded himself that waiting strategically was a form of strength. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from the Internal Affairs investigator assigned to the case. The officer explained that Daniels had been questioned and that his statements were being compared with those of witnesses and the courtroom footage. Marcus listened carefully as the officer described the process. He appreciated how professional and thorough they were being. He realized that his detailed notes, combined with witness statements and camera recordings, had created a strong foundation for the investigation. The following week, Marcus noticed small changes in how some courthouse staff interacted with him. People who had seemed tense or distant before were now more open. A few quietly expressed support for Marcus's decision to report the incident. He also learned that some of Daniel's past behavior had drawn attention, and that Marcus's report was helping to highlight a pattern. It was not only about the single courtroom incident anymore. It was about accountability and professionalism across the department. Marcus thought about how easy it would have been to react impulsively when Daniels had shoved him. Most people might have argued, yelled, or even tried to retaliate. But Marcus's approach had been different. By remaining calm, documenting every detail, and contacting Internal Affairs, he had allowed the process to work in his favor. He realized that discipline and intelligence often mattered more than anger or immediate action. A few days later, Marcus received another call from the investigator. They explained that several witnesses had corroborated his account. Even Daniel's own words captured in the investigation did not fully support his claim that the incident had been accidental. Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction. He was not seeking revenge, but he understood that truth and fairness were being recognized. His careful and patient approach was making a difference. Marcus continued to spend time at the community center, mentoring young people. He shared lessons from his own experiences without mentioning the courtroom incident directly. He taught them about patience, strategy, and standing up for what was right in a calm and disciplined way. The children listened with curiosity and respect. Marcus realized that his actions were not only shaping the investigation, but also serving as a real-life example for others. Meanwhile, the investigation reached an important stage. Internal Affairs had gathered sufficient evidence to prepare a formal report. The officer in charge explained that Daniels would be called for further review, and that appropriate actions would be recommended based on the findings. Marcus felt a sense of relief. The process had been thorough and fair, and the system was functioning as it should. Despite the progress, Marcus remained humble and composed. He knew that real change required more than one incident being resolved. He reflected on his own behavior and felt proud that he had acted with integrity. By focusing on the facts, staying calm, and using strategic thinking, he had demonstrated how to handle conflict without escalating it. One evening, Marcus sat quietly on his porch watching the sunset. He thought about the journey so far, from the unexpected shove in the courtroom to the ongoing investigation. He realized that courage came in many forms. It was not only about facing danger in the battlefield, it was also about facing challenges with patience, intelligence, and determination. Marcus knew that the next phase of the process would continue to test him, but he felt ready. He understood that accountability, fairness, and integrity were worth waiting for. That one careful action, the call to Internal Affairs, had already started to create meaningful change. Marcus smiled quietly to himself. The situation had begun as a moment of tension and injustice, but it was slowly transforming into a story of responsibility, courage, and hope. Marcus had been waiting patiently for updates from Internal Affairs, and now he began to see the impact of his careful actions. The investigator called him with new information. "Marcus," the officer said, "we have discovered that Officer Daniels has had other complaints in the past. Your report helped us see a pattern of behavior that might have otherwise gone unnoticed." Marcus listened carefully, feeling a mix of surprise and satisfaction. It was not personal revenge he sought. He simply wanted accountability. The revelation confirmed that his decision to report the incident had been important, not only for him but for others who might have been affected by Daniel's actions. Marcus realized that one clear, well-documented report could influence much more than he had imagined. Over the next few days, Internal Affairs conducted additional interviews. Witnesses were asked for further statements, and the courtroom footage was reviewed again. Marcus remained calm, understanding that the process required time. He continued his routine of exercise, family time, and volunteering at the community center. Staying busy helped him focus on positive activities rather than worrying about the outcome. At the community center, Marcus found himself reflecting on the lessons from the situation. He had always taught young people about courage and responsibility, but now he had a real-life example to share. He emphasized the importance of patience, careful planning, and using intelligence instead of reacting in anger. Marcus explained that standing up for what is right often requires discipline and foresight, not just force. One morning, Marcus received another call from the investigator. They explained that Daniels would be formally reviewed and that the evidence suggested he needed further training and supervision. Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction. The system was working, and his careful approach had played a significant role. He thought about the courtroom incident again, remembering the initial shock and tension. That moment had seemed small and personal at first, but it had set in motion a process that was now bringing accountability. Marcus also noticed subtle changes in his interactions with others. Courthouse staff who had been distant before now greeted him politely. Some officers acknowledged his presence with a respectful nod. Marcus realized that integrity and patience could create influence in ways he had not expected. By acting responsibly and calmly, he had earned the respect of people around him, even those who had initially doubted him. Despite the progress, Marcus remained humble. He understood that real change took time, and that Daniel's behavior might not be completely fixed overnight. But the investigation was making a difference, and that was important. Marcus reflected on his time in the Navy SEALs. He had faced dangerous missions where careful action and strategy were crucial. Now he was applying the same principles in a civilian setting, proving that discipline and intelligence were valuable in all areas of life. As the days passed, Marcus continued to prepare himself mentally for the final stages of the investigation. He reviewed his notes one more time and stayed ready to provide any additional statements if needed. He understood that patience and preparation were key. Acting impulsively could have undone all the careful work he had done. One evening, Marcus sat quietly in his living room, reflecting on the journey so far. From the initial shove in the courtroom to the ongoing investigation, he realized that courage and responsibility came in many forms. True strength was not always about reacting immediately. Sometimes it was about staying calm, making smart decisions, and trusting the process. Marcus felt proud, not of any personal victory, but of knowing that he had acted with integrity and contributed to fairness and accountability. He also felt hope. The steps he had taken were already making a difference, and he understood that his example could inspire others. By remaining disciplined, patient, and strategic, he had shown that one person's careful actions could create meaningful change. Marcus closed his eyes, confident that the process would continue to bring justice and that his decisions had already started to reshape the situation for the better. Marcus had been patient for weeks, and now the final stages of the investigation were approaching. Internal Affairs had gathered all necessary evidence, spoken to witnesses, and reviewed the courtroom footage carefully. Marcus knew that the process had been thorough, and he felt a sense of quiet confidence. He had done everything he could, staying calm and documenting the incident, and now the results were about to show. One morning, Marcus received a call from the investigator. "Marcus, the report is complete," the officer said. "We have recommended formal action for Officer Daniels. He will undergo training and supervision, and there will be monitoring to ensure professional behavior moving forward." Marcus felt a wave of relief. The situation, which had started as an unexpected confrontation in a courtroom, was being addressed fairly. He had not sought revenge or punishment. He had sought accountability, and now it was happening. Marcus reflected on how far he had come. At first, the shove from Daniels had been shocking. He had felt a rush of frustration and even anger. But instead of reacting impulsively, Marcus had relied on patience, careful planning, and his experience from the Navy SEALs. By documenting the incident, contacting Internal Affairs, and remaining calm throughout the process, he had transformed a tense situation into one of fairness and justice. As the news settled, Marcus continued his daily routine. He visited the community center, where he worked with young people on discipline, strategy, and responsibility. He shared stories about facing challenges without losing composure, emphasizing that courage could take many forms. Marcus never mentioned the courtroom incident directly, but his lessons carried real meaning. The young people listened closely, inspired by his calm confidence and practical approach to solving problems. Meanwhile, Marcus noticed subtle changes in the courthouse environment. Staff members and officers who had been tense or dismissive now treated him with respect. Even Officer Daniels avoided direct contact, showing signs of acknowledgement without confrontation. Marcus understood that these small changes reflected the effectiveness of accountability and fair processes. One careful and patient action could influence behavior more than force or anger ever could. One afternoon, Marcus received a formal letter confirming the results of the investigation. Daniels was required to attend professional conduct training and was placed under supervision for a period of time. Marcus read the letter quietly, feeling a sense of satisfaction that was calm, not boastful. He realized that justice was not about punishment for its own sake. It was about creating conditions for fairness, responsibility, and respect. Marcus spent the evening reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He realized that his experience in the military had prepared him not only for physical challenges, but also for situations that required mental discipline and patience. The courtroom incident had been unexpected, and it had tested him in a new way. By staying composed and acting with clarity, Marcus had not only ensured accountability for Daniels, but had also demonstrated the power of intelligence, strategy, and calm action. As the days passed, Marcus noticed a growing sense of peace. The incident was officially resolved, and he could focus fully on positive activities in his life. He continued mentoring at the community center, volunteering, and spending quality time with his family. Marcus understood that real strength came from staying calm under pressure, thinking strategically, and choosing the right moment to act. One evening, Marcus sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. He thought about the journey, from the initial shove in the courtroom to the completion of the investigation. He smiled quietly to himself. The outcome was fair, the process had been thorough, and he had handled everything with integrity. Marcus knew that courage, discipline, and patience could create meaningful change, sometimes more than any immediate reaction ever could. He also reflected on the wider lesson. Standing up for what was right did not require aggression. It required thoughtfulness, evidence, and calm action. By choosing the right approach, Marcus had turned a tense and unfair situation into a story of accountability, professionalism, and respect. As he looked at the fading light of the evening, Marcus felt confident that his actions had not only changed his situation, but also set an example for others, showing that integrity and patience were powerful tools in any challenge. Marcus woke early with a sense of calm satisfaction. The investigation had concluded and the results had been fair and clear. Officer Daniels would undergo training and supervision, and accountability had been established. Marcus felt a quiet pride, not from seeing someone punished, but from knowing that he had handled the situation with intelligence, patience, and integrity. He had turned a tense confrontation into a story of fairness and responsibility. That morning, Marcus decided to visit the community center. As he walked through the doors, he was greeted warmly by the staff and children he worked with. He had always focused on teaching young people about discipline, courage, and strategy. But now he had a personal example to share. He gathered a small group of teens and began talking about challenges and how to handle them effectively. "Sometimes life gives us difficult moments," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "People may act unfairly or situations may surprise us. The choice we have is how to respond. Acting with anger often makes things worse. But staying calm, planning carefully, and taking the right steps can change everything." The children listened intently, asking questions about patience, courage, and standing up for what is right. Marcus explained that bravery was not only about facing danger physically, it was also about facing challenges with discipline and intelligence. He shared how, in his own life, one careful action, a phone call, had started a chain of events that led to fairness and accountability. He encouraged the young people to remember that thinking strategically and staying composed were as powerful as any direct action. After leaving the community center, Marcus spent time with his family. He shared the lessons he had learned from the incident without focusing on the confrontation itself. He spoke about integrity, patience, and responsibility. His family listened carefully, and he felt grateful for their support and understanding throughout the process. Marcus realized that life's most important victories were often quiet and thoughtful, rather than loud or immediate. Over the following weeks, Marcus noticed subtle changes in his environment. Courthouse staff, officers, and community members treated him with increased respect. He also observed changes in Officer Daniels' behavior, as the mandated training and supervision seemed to encourage more professional conduct. Marcus understood that accountability worked best when combined with education and guidance, not just punishment. One evening, Marcus took a long walk through the park near his home. He reflected on the journey that had started with a small but significant shove in a courtroom. That moment could have led to frustration, anger, or regret, but Marcus had chosen a different path. He had acted with patience, documented every detail, and contacted the right people. That one decision had created a ripple effect, influencing the outcome for himself, for Daniels, and even for those who might face similar situations in the future. As he walked, Marcus thought about the young people he mentored. He hoped that his example would inspire them to handle challenges thoughtfully, to choose strategy over reaction, and to understand the power of patience and intelligence. Courage, he realized, was more than action. It was composure under pressure, clarity in decision-making, and integrity in every step. Back at home, Marcus sat quietly on his porch, watching the sky darken into a gentle evening. He felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The journey had taught him that one person's careful and thoughtful actions could make a meaningful difference. By remaining calm, acting responsibly, and trusting the process, he had helped ensure fairness, accountability, and respect. Marcus smiled as he thought about the future. Life would always present challenges, but he now understood the value of patience, strategy, and integrity more deeply than ever. He knew that the lessons from this experience would stay with him, guiding him in every decision and every interaction. Marcus felt confident that his approach, calm, intelligent, and deliberate, could inspire others to face their own challenges with courage and wisdom. As the stars appeared in the evening sky, Marcus reflected on the journey from confrontation to resolution. One simple, careful action had started a process that created fairness, inspired respect, and demonstrated the power of patience and discipline. Marcus felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that integrity, strategy, and calm courage would always guide him in life.